Hi everyone. So I haven't put any videos up for a while. I got a bunch in the backlog, and I don't know. I just haven't really gotten around to it. I haven't prioritized it. But we had the Moxy Summit a couple of weeks ago, and I did a presentation, so I thought I would put that up on the channel. And then I recently did a podcast and a couple of different. It was pretty long, so a couple of different sessions. So I'll put those up as well. With Pinoe, it's a company that makes a portable VO2 device. I'll put those up, and I'll have a couple of other videos that I've pre-made. So I hope to put up a little bit of content in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully some people will find it interesting, and people can send me questions. I'll still try to answer them. A lot of questions I actually end up answering outside of making a video, because I always try to get everyone an answer, even if I don't put a video up. So you can send me a question even if I don't make a video. Most of the times I'll give you guys an answer back. So I hope you enjoy my presentations. Some of it's a little bumbling, but nonetheless, I think there's some interesting content there. Okay, enjoy. Bye. Yeah, thanks, Roger. Thanks for all the presentations so far. They've been great. I've been writing down questions. I'm definitely going to contact a bunch of people. So thank you very much. I think the first thing I have to start with is a little disclosure. So I work directly with Moxy a lot, with Roger since the very beginning. So I'm definitely biased. And I work, apart from doing my PhD at the University of Bern, I work for the company EDIAC, which sells the Moxy monitor in in Europe. We use software development things and for the Moxy. So what I want to talk about, which Roger kind of mentioned, is about the relationship between task failure and muscle oxygenation. And most people think about this more as the relationship between muscle oxygenation and performance, and about modeling this data. It's actually a little bit of a say. So Dr. Cooper gave me a little segue where how he ended his presentation. So we'll kind of go into that a little bit with the systems identification. So those of you who have done the Moxy Academy courses, you'll see this picture. You'll remember this picture and this screenshot here of data. And it's one of the first things that people generally do when they get a Moxy is they put it on a muscle and they measure. And what are you going to do when you put on a muscle? Well, you're going to do a muscle contraction. And if you do an isometric muscle contraction, you get this image here that we see, which brings us to the point, well, what are we really measuring with muscle oxygenation? And Dr. Cooper already mentioned this. Lots of people have talked about this. Well, we're really measuring two things. At least this is what Perry and Ferrari highlight. The balance between oxygen supply and demand, that was already mentioned. And the second part is this regional oxygen saturation reserve capacity. So if we look at the image, we looked at Roger doing his bicep contraction, what we see here is we have a resting value that's some kind of plateau that kind of moves up and down with rest. As soon as muscle contraction happens, you get this decrease in muscle oxygenation because there's a disbalance between supply and demand. After you release the contraction, this disbalance goes in the other direction and you have a recovery. So you have this oxygen supply and demand that we have highlighted. I'm going to actually put on my little power pointer because that might help a little bit. So this component right here is identified by the arrows. And then we have this little area in the middle, however you want to take the integral of this. And this is some kind of oxygen reserve that we just used up doing this muscle contraction. Okay. So doing this example, what you quickly realize while you're doing it is that as your muscle oxygenation changes, you get tired. The contraction gets hard and you want to let go. So you quickly come to realize that there's some kind of relationship here between the performance output of your muscle and what's going on here with your near signal. Now, there's lots of data on this. This is a nice curve you can look at here from Imagi et al. And what they showed is that if you do this kind of static gripping, this isometric contraction, you have this curvilinear drop right here in performance. and you have a change in oxygenation. So we're going to look at this this deoxy value right here, which is it goes up, and the deoxygenation goes up, and it kind of drops down again. And this explains to us kind of, well, there is some relationship between performance, what's happening here in this curvilinear pattern, and what's happening with this near signal. On a side note for everyone else, this inflection point is quite interesting. Just kind of highlights an occlusion threshold, because we were talking about occlusions. So you have this linear change, and then it starts this curvilinear change, and this is identified as you no longer have a muscle occlusion happening. It's an interesting side note, not to get off track here too far. But we have a relationship clearly between performance and what we're getting out of our near signal. Now, if there's a relationship, the question is, can we model these two things together? Can we model what's happening with performance with what's happening with muscle oxygenation? And as Roger mentioned, 2 years ago, Brett Kirby talked at the Moxy Summit. Last year, Phil Skiba talked. And listening to those kind of talks and looking at this curvilinear pattern that we have here, I think many of you will recognize what we're looking at is actually a very classical force or power time duration curve. And why is this important for us to recognize? Well, because if we want to do some kind of modeling, there's different approaches you can take to modeling. And I'm not an engineer, so I'm a sports scientist, but I'm working with some people who are better at these things than I am. And we're trying to model what we see in the physiology and in the performance and how these two things relate. And there's different ways that you can go about trying to do this modeling. And we have this spectrum here on the cyst identification modeling techniques. We have a first principle technique, and we have a data-driven technique. The first principle technique is often called like a white box. And a white box model, when you put data into this white box, and in the white box, we know exactly what's happening. It's transparent. We know all the rules that are going to dictate what the output is from the input. So something like Newtonian laws, like force equals mass times acceleration. On the other end of the spectrum, we have data-driven modeling, which is a black box modeling. We put data in, we don't actually know what's happening on the inside, and we get data back out. Now, there's a lot of tools that you can use to do this, and very complex systems are often modeled like this. The problem is they're not very satisfying, because we don't actually know what's going on. You're still left with this black box, which is, in my opinion, a problem in athletics, because you're putting data in, you're getting data out, and if you're getting different outputs from inputs, you don't really know why that's happening necessarily. But there's a third option, and that's you can do gray box modeling. And gray box modeling is something between the two. So if you have assumptions, or at least if you have some rules that you think dictates your model, you can plug them into this gray box, and then you can put data in and get data out, and you have some idea as to why this transformation is happening. Which gets us back to this curvilinear pattern that I was talking about. Well, we have some idea that there's a relationship between muscle oxygenation and performance. And so we got some idea as to what's going to guide our gray box. What we need for our gray box is some kind of mathematical system that's going to help us determine this relationship exactly, or close to exactly. It's a gray box. Some of the things are going to get figured out by the data. If we continue on this data track, what we're looking at here is, again, we have a nice curvilinear model, which we had before, and we have SmO2. This is a 3-minute all-out test, which many of you may have done if you do critical power testing. There's a couple of publications out there about this, that you can use a 3-minute all-out test to determine critical power and W prime. So what we see in this picture very nicely is this is this relationship between change in power and change in muscle oxygenation. That's why I really like this test to show this relationship. Which brings us directly to the Quickl power model. This is the model that Skiba and Kirby presented in the last two Moxy Summit. So in order to determine our gray box on how we're going to model the relationship between muscle oxygenation and performance, or time to task failure, which is kind of related to performance, we need to give our gray box some structure. And this Quickl power model, which we have on the right here, is going to provide us a certain degree of structure for this. And why do we think that this is going to give us some structure to this? And it has to do with this definition here of the information that